Hey everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Jesse Williams. If you're not familiar with me, I host the podcast Racing on the Rocks, where we cover everything from Ultra 4, full-size bouncers, UTV racing, and RC everything. Whether it's racers, manufacturers, or just people of interest, the show is awesome and I'm really glad that you're here to learn about something new today because let me tell you, it's cool.
Get a drink and gather around. Let's talk drivers. Let's talk rigs. Let's talk skill. You've got the best of the best in the off-road racing world. Have a seat at the table with us and let's talk about racing on the rocks.
Welcome back to the RBX10 Rift from Axial breakdown. This is phase one. And this is going to be my helper here for the next few minutes if he doesn't run off on me. I wanted to give you guys some more thoughts on this car as time has gone by and some of the modifications that I've done to make this car a little bit more my own, a little bit more effective, and just to give you my thoughts on everything. So first things first, this car is, as I said in the very first episode, my expectations, this car is extremely tough. I have gotten a chance to go out and run with Justin Hoback from Hoback Racing, where the spot we went to was primarily giant, bigger than my fist size rocks, huge long hills. And you can see here, there's just a little bit of scuffing, a little bit of damage on the actual chassis itself, but I can be the first to tell you that those hits that it took were very abrasive. They were rough, and I ran the car into rocks and didn't do it all on purpose, but this car is tough. This car is extremely tough. The axles are tough. The chassis is very tough. The drivetrain is very tough as well. One thing I will highlight right out of the gate is I am still running the servo that was sent to me by Axial, which is the Spectrum S614S. I'm not 100% sure if this exact servo is going to come in the ready-to-run truck, but it will be something similar for sure. One of my first areas of concern / praises, it's a double-edged sword really, is the servo saver. In any rock bouncing application, it's very rare that you have a stock servo make the lifetime. If anything, that's a guaranteed part that's going to fail. However, the servo saver that's currently on these vehicles ready to run is a dual band steel servo saver that is double shear, very tough. And what it does is it'll actually, if you can see on the video, if you watch right here, that bolt right there, it doesn't actually turn until there's quite a bit of pressure on it. Now what that's actually doing is the bands inside the actual servo horn are bending and flexing before the movement actually goes into the servo. So what that typically will mean was any outside attack, any redirection of the actual tires and wheels doesn't get translated into the servo. All of the, damaging things don't get translated into the servo, but when you actually use the servo to control, because the power is originating from down here, actually from the servo, you get a really clean power sweep. The servo actually works really great. It's very fast for me. Again, I'm not 100% sure if this is the exact servo that's going to be coming in your car, but this one's been really good for me. I've been very pleased with this front end. I've ran this front end into rocks and things like that, all typically on accident. Everything has lived up to its potential, really great. I was sent some option parts by Axial, some option knuckles, things like that to determine caster. I haven't put those on yet because really this still is my stage one, phase one of this build, and the stock plastic is still very tough, very stout, and able to handle the job. I don't necessarily know if I need the caster because these tires and wheels have proven time and time again that there is plenty of traction to be found in them. I've been very pleased with them, and again, like I said in my first video, I think that these tires will be the new standard. I probably will use these tires in all of my applications 2.2 just because they're the right kind of compound. It's a nice firm compound, but at the same token it's very soft. If If you look very slightly, you'll see on those outer tread blocks, you'll see some wear, some bite coming off the tires, just because we have mutilated these things, running them at very high speeds, and they're starting to show a little bit of wear. But these are, again, a super high performance tire. I'm so happy to have these here and have them on this car. Axial knocked it out of the park with these tires. I'm very happy, pleased, whatever you want to call it. These are really great. So another area has been the front suspension. I actually lowered the front suspension all the way down. One thing that tends to happen on rock bouncers, especially if you're doing really steep climbs or you're doing an incredibly long vertical, is there's this notion of the front end unloading. Now, you'll see it on one-to-one rock bouncers in the past, where I'm not exactly sure how one-to-one rock bouncers deal with it nowadays, because the cars are designed a little bit differently. I think the way that the one-to-one guys deal with it is their cars are actually built a lot lower center of gravity in the front end in particular. But when you're climbing, you know, your initial impact will compress the front end up, and as you're climbing, if you notice, the front end, once it gets to a point of climbing, it'll actually push the front end away. So you see how the front end lifts there. Now, when you get to a point when, you know, you're really climbing up, the front end will actually unload, and you'll actually push the car away from the hill, and it will push its front end off, and you'll kind of backflip off of it. I have experienced that just a little bit with this car. I have some plans to fix that, but not phase one. One easy fix that you don't have to really make an adjustment for is just lower the preload on there, and it'll adjust the ride height. Preload does not adjust any spring rate or anything like that, so it's not going to be any more loose or softer. It just sets the ride height. So we just got it set in just a little bit lower. I like that. It was a great adjustment. I definitely could tell a difference from doing that. The next thing that you'll notice is I'm actually running a different spring in the rear. Axial is going to offer some option parts, in particular option spring rates for the spring. They'll be a little bit longer. But speaking of ride height, I wanted something that was going to pull the car down just a little bit lower and soften it up substantially. So what I did was I grabbed some of the Axial orange spring rate springs for my rear end. There's a space in the rear here in our fuel cell for weight. I'm currently not running any weight back there. This is where it becomes preference for a lot of folks, and preference and driving style and things like that. I don't like a heavy rear end. We'll see how that pays off ultimately, and I might reconsider. But the way I typically like to run my bouncers is with no weight in the rear end, a very soft spring, and I personally, again, this is going to come into driving style. I run a really fast fluid in the rear end. So what you'll see here is I run the orange spring, and I've actually switched out the weights to 25 weight oil in the two rear shocks, just to give it a little bit more rebound speed. Whereas you can see the front end has 35 weight, moves a little bit slower, and the rear end moves a little bit faster. Now, why would you do that? What's the theory behind that? And the theory is, in a rock bouncer, you hit the object with a little bit of momentum. So as you're rolling up to the object, the front end compresses. You wouldn't want your front end to be fast responding, because if it compresses and hits an obstacle as you're moving forward, you don't want the springs to unload, like I mentioned earlier. You don't want them to unload quickly, rather, and push the front of the vehicle away from where you're going. What you want ultimately is for the front end to soak up the first bump and kind of slow down just a little bit and let the rear end get to it. Now, by the time the rear end gets to it, the front will have unloaded, but the rear end in particular, in my opinion, should be very soft to soak up the bump and have a quick response to re-level the car. Now, what I mean by that is, if I come in and I hit an obstacle, I'll get all of the spring load. It will unload as I'm moving over it. The rear end will soak it up very quickly because it's a very light spring rate, so it'll hit the obstacle, soak it up. As the momentum continues to bring the car over, it'll unload, kind of righting the situation and kind of kicking the back end up just a little bit more. Now, in my experience, I typically will only have a situation where I really have to bump it like that on a big ledge. The ledges typically will work better if you bump it, the rear end hits it, and kind of re-levels itself back up there. What you don't want to have happen is your rear end be so slow that when you bump something, the rear end never comes back and it just soaks it up and just eventually shoots you up in the air vertically. It's not exactly what you want. In my opinion, you kind of want a more horizontal effect in the air, so that's why I run it just a little bit faster. The next thing that you'll notice I've added to the car is actually a sway bar. Now, Axial has developed a sway bar for this car that actually will mount up here, and it will go back to the mounting location that I have mine at. We'll say this. I fabricated my own out of a Yeti rear sway bar just due to the parts that were available to me. I wanted to do something a little bit different rather than having a really long sway bar run off the back right here, cover up the shock, and kind of make this a little bit more busy. What I chose to do was repurpose a Yeti rear sway bar. I drilled a hole through the fuel cell and use the fuel cell as the mounting point. Now, one thing that you'll notice is this bar is not entirely straight, and there's an ability for it to slide around just a little bit. It's not the best situation, but this is phase one, and I'm just trying to get a proof of concept. I also homemade some links for the rear, and as you can see, things need to be squared up just a little bit more. It's not the best, it's not the end-all solution, but with this rear trailing arm set up, ready to run, you do not receive a sway bar. Axial offers a sway bar kit for this. There will be multiple manufacturers that offer a rear sway bar for this car. I highly recommend that you take advantage of it. I'll tell you something to learn from my experience. Coming back through here, you'll see that there's a silver bolt in there now. I drilled through and wanted to run my sway bar back here right off the back of the chassis. You'll see some rigs do that, some don't. When I did that, because I'm reusing this and this has a built-in arm in the actual sway bar itself, it didn't exactly work because it either put my arms way out here, or if I turned it around inward, it ran my arms very, very close to the shock. It just wasn't an ideal situation, so I ended up going to the fuel cell. If you were to have something where you could have adjustable links of your sway bar arm, running your actual sway bar through the rear of the chassis right there, having a very, very short sway bar arm, either this direction or this direction, it's either way. Personally, if it were me, I would run it inboard because you see here this sway bar link is a little laid over. It's not exactly ideal, but we're working through it. If you had a short arm, you could run it through the back of the chassis, no problem. I did have to drill out the fuel cell piece here, so this bar right here did have to be drilled out to let the sway bar pass through it, but with a little bit of time, patience, you can get through it, no problem, and everything works good to go. So I have messed with the rear shock mounting locations here and here. Obviously, the more angle you have on your shock, so if I were to move the shock from this hole to this hole, it'll actually soften the spring rate just a little bit more just by angle. The more straight up a shock is, the more straight up the spring is, the more compression, the more weight it will take to compress the spring. When the spring is at an angle, you'll find that it's a little bit harder, or it's a little bit easier rather, to compress that spring. I got my ride height back with this particular orange rate spring with its particular length. I got my ride height back by using it vertically, and it still seems just to work a little bit better. This spring isn't necessarily ideal. I think the spring rate is ideal, but they'll send the correct width to me. I think that'll be available as an option part, so I should have access to that at some point in the future. As for right now, electronics wise, I think this car is it's about perfect. It's somewhere in the middle, and when I say about perfect, it is a sensorless system, so you're going to experience some cogging down at low speeds, or if you're on the bottom of a ledge or something like that, you'll experience cogging. It's just the nature of a sensorless system. In an ideal world, this system would be sensored and it would be perfect. As of right now, this system is pretty good. You have a lot of high-end power, just enough low-end power, and the middle band torque. If you keep this car moving, you won't experience any cogging. I've been really pleased with some of the seat time that I've had, or just some of the controller time rather, just playing with the car. You get an idea of what it's supposed to feel like. You get an idea of how to drive it and all those things. This is a really effective car, you guys. Once you get it going, once you really learn how to maneuver the car, when to give it gas, when not to. It works really well. Now, it's a little bit different than other cars because it does have a center diff. So as soon as the front end comes up, all of your power will go to the front end. Typically, that hasn't always been the case for me, but it has been sometimes, I would say most rather than some, because it kind of has a built-in set fail-proof system. If your front end's up, you don't want your rear end, getting all the power and shooting it off and blasting it into the sky, and vice versa. You don't want your front end just pulling when the rear's not attached either. The center diff has 1 million weight fluid in there. It's been very effective for me. I've been very pleased with it. I have noticed that if you put your hands actually on the diff after you've run it for 20, 25, 30 minutes, the diffs are kind of hot. I don't know about the longevity of the oil, or the grease rather, or diff oil, or whatever you want to call it. There might be some wear and tear and fading, maybe. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you. But I have noticed my diffs do get hot if I really beat on the car for a long time. But all in all, the diffs do great. I am very pleased with this car. I initially had some hesitation about the electronics and the gearing, things like that. I voiced those hesitations to Axial, and what I did was I put another 2 hours into the car. I put more and more time into this car, and the more play time you get with it, the more driving time you get with it, it really starts to really develop a personality. You know how to drive it. You know the characteristics of how the car is going to perform. The driveline has been great. One thing I did not mention in my first review was that all of these cars, the front end on all of these cars is going to come with Axial universal joints rather than dog bone style. See if I can get you a nice picture of that. So you'll see that there's the universal joint in there rather than the dog bone, so you don't have to worry about that. I was blowing dog bones left and right on all of my AR60 applications, which is a time saver because now I don't have to take the axle apart and do it all again myself. I upgraded to universals every single time otherwise. The U-joints in the drive shaft are absolutely awesome. Transmission's awesome. Everything seems to be extremely stout on this car. I'm pleased. 10 out of 10 so far. I'm very happy. Well, let's say 9.5 out of 10. The other 0.5 would be if this system was censored. If it was censored, easy win. Never have to change anything again. I have been made aware that there's in the Rock Bouncer competition leagues, there is a stock class that will be forming, and this is going to be the car of choice. Obviously, this is going to be an extremely competitive car, extremely fast car with the unlimited class. A little bit of tuning, this car will beat any car in the unlimited class. No tuning right out of the box, this car is going to beat a lot of those unlimited cars. This is a very, very good car. If you're in competition, scrap what you have now and start here. This is the way to go. A couple things that I did just in, for preference here. I got everything nice and clean. I found the best way to clean these things is to spray it down with Simple Green, or in my case, I used a Clorox with bleach, and then take an air hose, get it all clean. That way it looks nice and clean. There's still a little bit of dirt on there, but it was way cleaner than it was from running it with the Hoback squad. Next, I bought a $12 paint pen. You can't see it anymore because this car has been thrashed on, but $12 paint pen. I painted my wheel rings to look just like a scale bouncer with some matching color there, and I even gave, I think you can see this one probably better, I even gave the studs there a little bit of touch of gold, and it worked out really great. It's a really great car, you guys. I'm happy. I'm excited. This car is fun. It steers well. It drives well. There's plenty of power. This is something really great. I have a couple things in mind for Phase 2. Phase 2 is going to be probably some chassis changes, maybe very mild chassis changes. Just when I say that, I mean I'm probably going to run my battery a little bit differently than this car is initially set up to run. A few different things in the works, but that'll be down the road. I'm going to run this car right now like this for a long while because it's just perfect. It really is absolutely perfect. So I'll keep running this car. I hope you guys are enjoying these. This is the Phase 1 of the Ryft RBX10 from Axial, and it is absolutely a fantastic car. Thanks, guys. Make sure you're subscribed. Follow us on the podcast and Facebook and Instagram at Racing on the Rocks. You guys are the best. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think I should do to this car, or when you get yours, what you'll be doing first. For phase one, not too bad, just a little bit of paint, adjustment of a spring, and some shock weight. We're ready to rumble. Thanks, guys.